Okay, I'll explain. So, see, the question he asked is about they've been given some options. And out of the, okay, so options में क्या क्या लिखा? They have given certain goods. And if you could notice the goods, mostly they are, some of them are primary articles, right? Agricultural produce. Some of them are processed food produce. Processed food produce. Some of them are manufactured goods. Okay? And I guess you might be aware of the fact, in the last class, I think we also have discussed the same. The decision related to GST is not taken by union government alone. It is taken by GST Council. So as of now, many of you might be aware of the fact, alcoholic beverages were not under the purview of GST. Same is the case with petroleum products. They are not under the purview of GST. Okay? So in fact, anything related to GST has to be a collective decision. And the decision is made by GST Council with the voting. 75% is the minimum voting required. Got it? So either to bring an item under the purview of GST, or to keep something out of the GST purview, or change the GST tax rates, has to be taken by GST Council. Okay? Yes. And now, okay, what are the different GST rates we have? Very few goods are exempted from GST. I mean, at fact, zero. Very few. Mostly the primary articles. Okay, isn't it? I mean, non-processed food. I mean, okay, it's not completely food articles or out of GST. Isn't it? Very few. Attract is 0%. So, and we have GST starting from 5%. But technically speaking, there is a 3% GST rate too. And gold, silver, bullion may 3% GST. But let's not worry about it. 5%, 12%, 18, and then you have 28, right? Yes. So the reason the question would be asked generally is, take the case of petrol. Many a times you might be noticing some states do end up complaining petrol prices are increasing. And what is Mr. Modi doing? हमारे यहाँ पे that's a perception, right? So everything, even your personal problem is basically the problem. Okay, isn't it? Modi is responsible. That's a general perception of Indians. Girlfriend got married, you blame Modi. Take the case of oil produce. I mean petroleum products. Upon these petroleum products, basically who are the companies selling these petroleum products? The oil marketing companies like HPCL, BPCL, Indian Corporation. We have these days a number of private companies too. Upon these petroleum products, there is a tax levied by union government. There is also a cess, road cess. I hope you understand the difference between cess, surcharge and tax. In general, cess and surcharge are levied or collected at the time of payment of a certain tax. That's the reason people happen to refer cess and surcharge as a tax on tax. Got it? It's simply an extra penny that you are liable to pay along with your tax. But the reason why cess and surcharge are said to be tax on tax is, if you look at your income tax. And I guess you know, along with income tax, people are also liable to pay a cess called education cess. Your tax is levied on your taxable income. Taxable income. Let's suppose, imagine, ignore the tax rebate. If you are earning 6 lakh rupees of income, ignore tax rebate. Remember in the last class I said the first 4 lakhs is tax exempted. Only the rest of 2 lakh rupees is your taxable income. Got it? Your annual income is 6 lakhs. But what is your taxable income? 2 lakhs. You understood now? Yes. Because the first 4 lakhs of income is exempted for everyone. So your annual income is 6 lakhs, but your taxable income has now come down to 2 lakhs because first 4 lakhs is exempted. And what's the slab rate? 4 to 8 lakh attracts 5% tax rate. So that means you are liable to pay 5% upon the extra 2 lakh rupees, which is your taxable income. So your tax is computed on your taxable income. But at the time of paying tax, you are also liable to pay cess. Let's suppose, to make things easy, let's say 5%. In general, it's 4%. 5%. So you are liable to pay 5% and extra money along with your income tax called education cess. And this 5% is not on your 6 lakhs. This 5% is not on all of your taxable income, not at least on 2 lakhs. This 5% is computed in general on the tax liability. You understood what I'm saying? Okay, so let me just so 6 lakh is your annual income, and the first 4 lakhs is exempted. Ignore tax rebate. So upon 2 lakhs, you are liable to pay 5% of your 5% of this 2 lakhs as income tax. And when I say education says, okay, for your computation, I'm assuming 5%. So this 5% is not computed on either your 6 lakhs or 2 lakhs rupees. This 5% is computed on your tax liability. What is the 5% of 2 lakhs? 10,000, right? This 5% is computed not on your taxable income, rather it's computed on your tax liability. So does mean along with 10,000 rupees of tax, you are liable to pay extra 5%, that is some 500 rupees. Got it? So that is the reason it is said to be called a tax on tax. In general, cess and surcharge, they are computed not on your taxable income. In general, they are computed on your tax liability. Am I clear? When it comes to cess, the purpose is specified. Kiske liye the government is asking you an extra money other than your income tax? It's clear, right? Education cess, secondary higher education cess, clean energy cess, Swachh Bharat cess. Isn't it? Yes or no? Krishi Kalyan cess. Krishi Kalyan does mean farmer development. Isn't it? Farmer welfare. Farmer welfare. Krishi Kalyan don't translate literally into farmer's marriage. Isn't it? Yes. Krishi Kalyan for farmer's welfare. Road cess, infrastructure cess. So the purpose has been clear. And ideally this money happens to be spent only for the purpose it is intended to. So the government has no reason to divert it. It is ideally meant for. But surcharge, the purpose in general is not specified. That's it. But both have to compute the same. So coming back to the question of GST, see, as of now when it comes to petroleum products, the union government levies a tax. On top of it, there is also cess levied. But the states do also collect tax, sales tax. Got it? So इसी वजह से ना any tax the union levies remains uniform across the country. The cess levied by union also remains uniform across the country. Then why do the petrol prices vary? Because the tax component of state do vary from state to state. Am I right? So that being the reason that the price of petrol in Hyderabad and the price of petrol in Visakhapatnam do happens to vary. And every time there is a rise in price of petrol, because as of now the price of petrol are linked to the market. Does mean the change in crude oil prices would obviously result in change in price. Because in good old days, the union government used to administer the price of these oil products. Administer has been the union government used to say, I would dictate the price at which you need to sell. But he would ask, if it has cost me 100 rupees, how dare you to ask me to sell it at 80? The union used to say, don't worry, I'm going to subsidize. I mean, that 20 rupees of burden, I'm going to bear. You got it? So there were times where the oil products in India, when I say oil products, I mean petrol, diesel and all these things. They used to be administered by government of India, union government. Got it? But as of now, they have just been linked to market prices. You guys getting it? Yes. So whenever there is a rise in price, the states do end up saying that it's not our problem, it's a union government that could reduce the price, and it's because of union government actions the prices are increasing. And that's where you might have noticed the union government says, in such case, let's bring it under the purview of GST. Problem solved. But many states doesn't accept for it. Why? Because when it comes to the state component sales tax, no, that directly goes into state pocket. And out of any tax collected by union government, you also receive some part of it as per Finance Commission recommendations. Yes or no? So in general, a significant part of tax money collected on oil products accrues to state. Yes or no? Because on every tax collected by union, you have a share in it. Whatever you collect, that directly goes to your pocket. Isn't it? So that being the reason, let's suppose if I settle, let's say the caramel popcorn itself. Isn't it? Or salted popcorn, caramel popcorn. If you noticed it, there before that GST council has met, it is being taxed at a different rate. And collectively they made a decision because caramel is sugar coated, right? Yes or no? Because any sugar candy, the thing is that the logic there is simple. Okay, you might be thinking it's popcorn, but generally it's a caramel popcorn doesn't mean it's sugar, right? It's sweet. Yes or no? So when any sugar candies, isn't it, attract a GST of, let's suppose, 18%. Why the sugar coated popcorn would be treated at a different price? So henceforth, collectively they made a decision, let's treat it as a sugar, sugar candy they say, let's treat it as a sweet and let's impose the tax that we are imposing on any goods. Am I clear now? So if there is a question asked before that, what's the tax rate on popcorn? Got it? It would have been different. Now it would have been different. So the question you asked, right? So look at it. Like previous class may have happened to show you sales tax, service tax. मैंने पूछा, isn't it? But if I repeat the same question now, if UPSC, it doesn't make sense. Why? As of now, literally speaking, there is no exclusive tax by name sales tax, service tax. It is GST. Got it? So that's the reason. If you just look at the question and try to find out an answer as per the current situation, then you would get a mismatch. Got it? Understood? So that's the reason. So most of the such factual questions are based on current affairs. Based on current affairs. Got it? So इसी वजह से what might be true some 4 years back, or the good that attracts 12% might not attract the same now. Got it? So now if this been a question, this is the commodity attracts 12% GST. It might be attracting 12% GST 4 years pehle. Maybe the government might have exempted out of GST. Who knows it? Got it? So इसी वजह से ना such kind of factual questions, you don't need to worry about the current scenario. You guys can get it? Alright. So you just look at, just search for what's the bracket tax rate on that particular commodities in that particular year, and that's look at it. Okay. So इसी वजह से on such factual questions you don't need to worry about it. And the other is, okay, equalization levy. Equalization levy. People also refer it as. In fact, remember in the last class I was discussing about base erosion profit shifting. Because the corporate tax rate in all countries is not uniform, and it's not necessary. Because what would be the tax you impose on personal income? Do you think it has to be uniform? No, there are n number of countries where the tax rate on personal income is literally zero. Yes or no? That's the reason a good number of our celebrities do happens to prefer residing in Dubai. Not that Dubai has a better weather compared to Hyderabad and Bangalore or Chennai, right? Why? Yes. So the tax rate either on income, on wealth, or on corporate profits, or on dividends, paid. It's a orientation. It's up to the government of India. But it happens, the corporate tax rate in Singapore, let's suppose, is 5%, whereas India is 10%. It's less, more than 20%. So these multinational corporations, which happens to have presence across various parts of the world, they just try to manipulate using what we call transfer mispricing. Mispricing simply does mean, because there would be transaction taking place between the parent company and subsidiary company. Yes or no? So what do? By simply manipulating their transactions, reporting that they are paying more amount of money for their subsidiary in a country where the taxes are very low. Got it? Let's say take the case of example of Apple. What do you really think is the most valuable asset of Apple company? The building, the property? What do you think is the most valuable asset? Is it a physical property or intellectual property? The most valuable asset of Apple, physical property or intellectual property? Yes, it has a lot of patents. Imagine all patents are owned by a company that's registered in the United States of America. Any money that's made from these patents are taxable in USA. Isn't it? Rather, what do? I create a company in a tax haven. Tax haven. Tax haven simply does mean a country where the tax rates are zero or very minimal. Like Luxembourg. Got it? Or Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands. There have been N, almost 60 to 70. In fact, for that matter, like Mauritius states. Tax haven. So I create a company and I simply register all my patents upon that company. You got it? So any part of the world, any Apple company that makes use of these patents does pay money only to that company to whom the patents have been registered, which resides in a tax haven. Am I right? So that's how the company registered in tax haven could mint billions and trillions of dollars, at the tax payable in that country literally is zero. You guys getting it? So this is how you are eroding your tax base in a country where the tax rates are very high. How are you doing this? How are you achieving this? By shifting profits from a high taxing country to low taxing country. Am I right? This is what we call base erosion, profit shifting. And I asked you to go through the case, Nokia versus Government of India, because in 2011, government figured out Nokia for around 5 years has been doing the same practice and evaded a payment of tax of 20,000 crore rupees in India. And that being the reason, somewhere in 13-14, the question being asked. Don't ever think UPSC randomly asks a question. Okay, that itself is the reason I've been saying, if you are regularly going through business page of any national news daily, believe in me, 9 out of 10 questions from economy is in your pocket. It's easy. So since there's an incident happened and there's an issue going on, the UPSC is expecting that you people might be aware. But rather than asking, okay, which company has made this fraud, they're just asking what's the meaning of the word base erosion, profit shifting. In fact, the question is so simple, they're asking what is it related to? You know, there was a question long back, the term net demand and time liabilities is related to which of the following? Banking, tourism, insurance, so on so. Got it? Sometimes UPSC also happens to make some cheap experiments. Am I right? Because the word NDTL, who doesn't know? Isn't it? And you should be sorry, because if you've been asked such a very silly question, isn't it? The competition increases because everyone could answer it. I said no. But one thing is clear, that if you're regularly going through newspaper, revising what is being reported in the business page, it's very easy to attempt it. So now coming back to the story, what we've been discussing. So the tax rates in different nations being different, so not only countries like India, every major economy across the world is experiencing a huge loss in tax revenues. That's the basic reason. The amount of profits, the corporate profits, Meta reports, Google reports, Amazon reports, Apple reports, and at the end of the day, look at the taxes they are paying, it's peanuts. They report billions of dollars of profits. But if you look at the profits, the tax they're paying, it's very minimal. How are they achieving this? By simply resorting to the same practice of shifting their profits to the low taxing countries and eroding the tax base in high taxing economies. Got it? So easy was just say long back. These G20 nations, G20 nations, which represent around 80% of global economy, they have come with a proposal. Why not come with a minimum tax rate, a global minimum tax rate? That means हर एक देश में कम से कम there has to be minimum 15% of corporate tax rate. Let's come with a global minimum tax rate. That was a proposal. As of now, it has not become a reality. Same logic holds good when it comes to the equalization levy. Okay, the thing in this case, I'm just giving. So your concern is, why would US accept it? But the thing is that the one who is providing, let's suppose the Google, who happens to sell a service like ad service. Google, does sell service like ad service? Yes or no? In fact, you think that Google is a search engine. Isn't it? But I would say Google is an advertising company. Because that's how they make money, right? Yes or no? Do you think they just make money by providing a free service called search engine to you? No. Isn't it? Yes. So now, if an Indian happens to make some payment to Google, isn't it? And that money has been paid, isn't it? By an Indian. And the service the Google is also providing to that guy is in India. He is in India. An Indian is paying for a service that is being rendered within India. You guys getting it? But other if the one who collects it in some foreign soil, isn't it? So what's going to happen? For a service that's been consumed, someone outside India is generally making money, right? Yes or no? Isn't it? And at the same time, Aajkal Jamana, you might also have noticed the Indian government is insisting all these foreign service providers Agar if you provide service to my people within my country, and I want you to, because these companies like Amazon, what do you think is the most valuable asset of Amazon? I'm not asking Forest, the Amazon e-commerce company. The consumer data. Yes or no? So henceforth, I think you might have come across the Indian government is insisting that data localization. That means you collect it, and that's basically your business. But I want that to be residing within my, that's all. Because any loss related to data privacy, isn't it? That okay, with respect to my country, I could enforce them if that particular data is stored within it. Am I right? It's the same logic. If you are collecting money for a service being provided within this country, then definitely whatever the tax, isn't it, you collect has to be a tax that belongs to, you guys getting it? And that's a, okay, right we do have. You guys getting it? Following. So the question is whether, okay, someone accepts or not, but that's the policy. That's the policy, isn't it? And the Indian state has every right to do so. Else what do? I have every right to kick you out. Isn't it? So I think in 1777, I guess, the Indian government has asked the Coca-Cola, share your formula. Because what's the ingredient you're using to make this Coca-Cola? If I'm not aware, what if you are adding something that would be causing okay, some health disorder? They said, no, we would not. Then Maharaji, they said, then get out. We kicked them out. And later in 93, after the liberalization, they came back. 77, we kicked them out because they refused to share their formula. 93, they came back. So if the same logic holds good, the Indian state, because it's our sovereign right? So like you say, what if someone refused to pay tax? That's not the question. It's just because you're an American company, you cannot say that I will refuse to pay tax, because once you're operating in India, you have registered your company. So once you register a company, no matter the whatever happens to come from US, UK or any part of Europe, once a company is registered in India, now it happens to become a resident entity of India, and you are liable to comply as per the laws of this land. Is that clear now? Understood? Got it? Yes. That's things, how things work. Is it? Now got? Yes. So I think, did we discuss this question? So what was the last thing we discussed? So what was the last, okay. So I think I explained about how the tax revenue is shared with the states, vertical devolution and then horizontal devolution. So the Finance Commission not only recommends the Union government, suggests the Union government, right, how the tax revenue has to be shared or appropriated. Isn't it? Right? The vertical, horizontal. The Finance Commission also make recommendations with respect to grants. Other than the tax revenue, the Finance Commission also make recommendations to the Union government about grants that the Union has to allocate to states, other than tax revenue. Because there might be many states, in spite of certain tax revenue received from the center, might not have enough revenue to meet their recurring expenses. Getting what I mean to say? So the Union government, okay, the Finance Commission also makes recommendations with respect to grants the Union has to offer or allocate to the states. When I say grants, it's the money you don't need to pay back. So generally, these are the certain commonly, okay, terms of reference the Union government happens to put forth before the Finance Commission. And the same is the case with respect to the 16th Finance Commission. Tell me what should be the criteria when it comes to sharing the revenue from Union to states and among the states. And tell me the criteria with respect to the grants that I need to allocate to the states. Isn't it? So there should be a certain criteria which should be commonly acceptable among the stakeholders, and do let me know the criteria. It's not like randomly the Union government happens to simply draw some lottery and simply throw some money into the states. You guys getting it? Yes. So I think this is what we discussed. You answered this question too, right? So this is composition of transfer to states and union territories. Okay, so if you look at in this budget, devolution, Devolution simply does mean the share of tax proceeds of union to the states out of the divisible pool of revenue. And what comprises divisible pool of revenue? The net tax revenue excluding cess and surcharge. In fact, many states do happens to insist the union government. We also want the cess and surcharge should be part of the divisible pool of revenue. As of now, the cess and surcharge are outside the divisible pool of revenue. That means the union is not compelled to share that money collected in the form of cess and surcharge. But many states do happen to insist. Dekho, in the name of FRBM Act, have you heard about the term called Fiscal Responsibility Budgetary Management Act? You are imposing a limit on the money we borrow. Yes or no? When you impose a limit on the money we borrow, for our expenses are increasing. Either increase the limit or limit hata do. Remove the limit or increase the limit. Let's have the freedom to borrow more money. Else, share more of your money with me. You're already sharing 41%. You're very generous. TK. But I want even cess and surcharge to be part of it. The reason many states do happens to complain the proportional cess and surcharge to the gross tax revenue. Got it? If you look at 10 years back, we had hardly some 8 to 10%. You understand what I'm saying? The proportional cess and surcharge to the gross tax revenue is only 8%. But now it almost has increased to 20%. So out of total tax revenue, gross tax revenue, cess and surcharge happens to be 20%, and you are sharing the rest of 80%. That's a net tax revenue, isn't it? And that's the basic reason many states do say, why don't you also add cess and surcharge as part of divisible pool so that you will receive more money. Am I clear now? Yes. So as of now in the current budget, look at how much is the money. Around 14. Okay, let's look at the current year. 14.2 lakh crores is what the union is sharing with the states in the name of vertical devolution. And then remember I said there is also grants. Even these grants the union offers to the states is not random. Also based upon a criteria the Finance Commission recommends. And it is passing on 1.33 lakh in the form of grants. And then scheme related and other transfers. Scheme related. Generally, if you look at when it comes to the schemes of union government, we classify into central scheme and central sponsor scheme. Of course, these days they have been again divided to core schemes, core of the core schemes, optional schemes, and all such things. I think you are aware of it. But in general, the schemes are classified into two different categories: core schemes and core of the core schemes. Or okay, central scheme and central sponsored scheme. Okay, so just go through this. You will get an idea of what's the difference between central scheme and central sponsor scheme. You could notice when it comes to central scheme, do you recollect there is something called 7th schedule of constitution? Central list, state list, concurrent list. Yes or no? Yes. When it comes to central sponsor scheme, have you noticed the schemes are formulated with respect to those items that are part of the state list? Central scheme is with respect to those items that are part of a central list. So if it is a central scheme, I formulate the policy. Kya karna? I decide. Implementation, I take the responsibility. Whatever the money required, I'll do it from my pocket. When it comes to central sponsored scheme, I'm sponsoring with respect to an item that comes under your purview. But since I formulate, isn't it? But the item falls under your purview, your list. I would expect you to take the responsibility of implementing it. You take the responsibility of implementing it. You implement it. At the same time, let's also share the burden, expense burden. So, in general, if your state happens to be a state having special category status, 90% of the expenses is what the center happens to bear. 10% should be your contribution. And I think for a long time, Bihar and of course Andhra people have been promised, and the time also, they promised for 10 years. 14 said it should be for 24. Of course, 24 passed, and I don't really think, because Niti Aayog has explicitly mandated no more special category status to be issued. Anyone who is from Andhra state still having a hope, it's better to give up. Isn't it? Rather, the union government in the last two budgets, I think you people are lucky, has been allocating compared to, Siva just said many states do end up complaining, Andhra and Bihar are being given a priority, isn't it? So, special category status is near impossible. But I am just saying, there are many advantages out of other than this. So, not only this is the advantage that you get 90%, there are other advantages. Got it? Yes. But this, okay. You understood? And at the same time, if it is state having special category, then it should be around 70-30. And recently we have classified schemes again into core schemes, core of the core schemes. And that's the reason certain schemes, the center happens to pass on 70% of expenses. For certain schemes, it is 60. Okay, so just go through it. You will get an idea of what is a central sponsor scheme and how is it different from a central scheme. Huh? Housing. Yes. Yes, housing. That's the reason. See, generally you have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Isn't it? Yes. So in general, see, the thing is you would have this basic confusion. Generally the scheme, isn't it? Mostly, it's a central sponsored scheme. But generally, since the one who is implementing it is the state, right? Let's suppose, imagine myself, the union government would like to support each and every household in this country by passing some 3 lakh rupees. Okay, so in good old days, the government used to come with an offer. 3 lakh rupees worth of cement, steel, or all these things is what I'll just give it to you at free of cost. Rather than giving cement, steel, isn't it? I'll just simply go for a cash transfer. Rather than simply supporting in the form of kind, I'll just give you in the form of cash. Okay, so let's suppose I have come with a proposal for every household, I'll give you 5 lakh rupees. Let's make it 3 to 5 lakh rupees. Cash support. So the taxpayers' money is what I'm gonna use it to help those people who cannot afford to have a pakka house. So that you would get this 5 lakh rupees and you could also add some of your income, isn't it? And just simply come up with replacing your thatched roof with a pakka house. Am I clear now? The thing is that since I cannot, I don't have the resources. I cannot afford to implement it across all part of India. Since you know, you belong, isn't it? You identify the beneficiaries and pass on this extra, 5 lakh rupees to the respective beneficiary. And that's the responsibility I am expecting from you. Am I clear now? Yes or no? Now imagine you are the Chief Minister of a state. So you receive 5 lakh per beneficiary. But since now you are the one who is responsible for implementing it, and now you want to be more popular rather than Modi, what would you do? What's your name, sir? Chaitanya. Now you end up renaming it because at the end of the state is implementing Chaitanya Housing Yojana. Oh, 5 lakh, you give it to one person, only one family would be happy, but divide it into 5 people. इसमें an extra 10 rupee आपका पैसा डाल दो. 1 lakh 10 rupee for one household, Chaitanya housing scheme. Now you have 5 families which happens to be your vote bank. Am I right? Yes or no? In fact, this is how things generally work. Like take the case of the midday meals, isn't it? Or the Anganwadi centers. In fact, all of them are being implemented in the name of Integrated Child Development Scheme, ICDS. But they are being renamed by the respective states. It's all some XYZ schemes. So people would have a perception that the local leader is the one who is doing it, but a good part of the expenses happens to be the taxpayers' money, from all across India. Got it? Isn't it? So that's the reason that since they happen to be part of state list, isn't it? So along with the money I am passing, you would also add some money. And since you are also adding money, you are implementing it, obviously you have that particular leverage of naming a scheme after you or your wife or anyone from your family, because every regional party in India is a family fiefdom. Am I right? So how do you ensure you will be popular? In good old days, politicians used to spend money, their black money, to buy votes during elections. But now politicians have become very talented and they started buying votes using taxpayers' money since the day they happens to come to power. Am I right? and end up simply weeping. मेरा पास पैसा नहीं है to pay salaries. मेरा पास पैसा नहीं है to invest in capital expenses. Same data. Yes, obviously, when you have a given amount of money, either you could spend it for capital expenses or for your so-called freebies in the name of welfare. Right? Until unless you have a printing machine, you have to face this problem. Right? That's it. Is that clear now? Yes. So now let's look at. I have shown you the pie chart. Where does rupee come from? And this is how the rupee is spent. How the rupee is spent. So, एक बार just go through it. So, if you look at central sector schemes, interest payments. Remember, I said 1/5 of our budget outlay, 1/5 of our total expenses are on interest payments, and rest of expenses include just 80 paise. Okay, so and good part of it is never central schemes, central sponsored schemes, and then finance commission transfers. Isn't it? Defense major subsidies, state share of taxes, duties, isn't it? Right? So if you look at it, even the center happens to have a very, okay, isn't it? Tight liquidity. Am I right? Because look at it, 20 paise, see the interest payments and the loans borrowed by previous governments. 22 paise outrightly goes to states. And then you have 8, okay, finance commission transfers. So around 50 paise of whatever I receive, getting exhausted. And I have a discretion to just spend the rest of 50 paise. Is that clear now? So just go through it. You don't need to buy hard the numbers. But just okay, have a glance of how the government spends money. And where does more of your money is being spent. Am I clear? That's it. Iske alawa, you don't need to mug up anything from it. Okay? Yes, the same thing is what I arranged in the form of a bar chart. The pie chart has been rearranged in the form of bar chart, but there's nothing to worry. Okay? And I think you answered this question. So these are things that, okay, related to taxes. Yes. So we have seen the receipts and we also have seen the expenses of the government of India. Isn't it? Yes. Now let's okay. So now let's try to look at the deficits. So I explained you receipts and explained you the expenditure. And you know, any financial statement in general, the rule of thumb is a financial statement ideally should be a balanced statement. Like you might have seen balance sheet. Okay, the assets should be equal to liabilities plus equity, right? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Same thing holds good with an annual financial statement. What is the annual financial statement? Does consist of a comprehensive statement of all possible receipts and all possible expenses for a given period of time. So ideally, if you open the budget, okay, I think you could, okay, you know where to look at the budget sheet. indiabudget.gov.in, where you find all the economic surveys and all the previous budgets, including the current budget and economic survey. indiabudget.gov.in, Ministry of Finance ka site. Getting? Yes. So if you look at it, ideally speaking, the total receipt. So if you just look at any budget sheet, the total receipt should be equal to total expenditure. Because imagine your finance minister happens to promise the people, "Arey bhai, dekho, this year in the coming financial year, I am planning to spend 50 lakh crore. But my income is going to be 30 lakh crore." Then obviously people would expect. What question comes to their mind? Easy kaise hote, madam? You plan to spend is 50 lakh crore, but the income you are expected to earn, either in form of taxes, non-tax revenue, or proceeds from disinvestment, dividends, repayment of interest by loans, interest payments by states, different sources of your non-debt creating receipts is only 30 lakh crore, but you have a plan to spend 50 lakh crore. How is it possible? So that's why the finance minister has to convey the people, there's nothing to worry because the rest of 20 lakh crore is what I am planning to borrow. And even I need a consent from you. Why? Because this 20 lakh crore is what you are gonna pay back. Am I right? Yes or no? Isn't it? So that's the reason. So the receipts includes the debt creating receipt plus non-debt creating receipt. And that non-debt creating receipt, ideally you shouldn't use the word income. That's the most non-debt creating receipt. But I'm just simply referring as income because that's something you could keep it. Clear now? Understood? Okay. The debt plus non-debt creating receipt is the total receipt. Should be equal to total expenditure. If total receipts equal to total expenditure, then where does the deficit comes in picture? Because if you subtract one from other, it should be equal to 0. But when it comes to deficit, we don't compare the total receipts with expenditure. We compare the income with the expenditure. So if you look at the total deficit, what you call fiscal deficit. Let's start with fiscal deficit. Sorry. Let's start with the fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit. So remember, I guess you could still recollect the word fisc refers to the treasury. So fiscal deficit literally translates, you could just literally translate, okay, as total borrowings. So fiscal deficit basically corresponds to the total borrowings the government plan to make for the next coming financial year. That's it. And how do you compute it? It is simply the difference between your total expenditure and simply you could write total income. But rather than writing total income, I am going to rewrite the same as total non-debt creating receipts. Total non-debt creating a receipt. Total non-debt creating a receipt. Am I clear? So, simply speaking, remember as income. But I would suggest this is the most appropriate. Right? Understood? So, ideally speaking, your fiscal deficit do corresponds to simply the borrowings the government is planning to make this year. Clear? Now let's suppose if you open the budget sheet, you got to know that the finance minister has reported the fiscal deficit for this year is 4.1%. 4.4%. Let's say this is what the finance minister has reported. In fact, there are two ways of representing the same. The total borrowings in absolute terms. Isn't it? So I could say the total borrowings in absolute terms is, let's say, some 15,96,000 crore rupees. That's one way. And the same thing could also be expressed in terms of some percentage, 4.4%. What does it mean? 4.4% of total expenditure? 4.5% of what? 4.5% of what? GDP. So why do we compare with GDP? Why don't you compare with the expenditure? Simple. Because when someone is planning to borrow, and to figure out is that borrowing really high or low, right? You should look at the income the man makes, the gentleman makes. Am I right? Yes or no? Let's say Deepika reports every year I borrow 10 lakh rupees. And Satvik also says, Satvik, right? Also, Saket also says that even I borrow 10 lakh rupees. But who among these two kids are borrowing more? Because the absolute amount of money they borrow remains the same, 10 lakhs. But imagine Deepika income per annum is 1 crore. Someone who is making 1 crore per annum, kabhi borrows 10 lakh rupees, not a big deal. Isn't it? But imagine Saket, isn't it? Borrows 10 lakhs and his income hardly is 10 lakhs. So that means his borrowings to income is 100%. So in absolute term, they borrow the same money. But it's clearly visible that Saket is going to be sooner or later going to fall in debt trap. Am I right? Yes or no? It is difficult for him to finance, isn't it, or service his debt, and it's easy for her. The reason is basically the money she borrows is peanuts in comparison to the income she makes. Am I right? So that being the reason, you might be coming across, we express our total savings to GDP ratio. So what's the total savings to GDP ratio of India? It's total savings to GDP, because GDP, as you know, is basically the income of the nation. So what's the total savings of this nation as a percent of GDP? What do you think is the savings to GDP ratio? So generally these are the ratios: savings to GDP ratio, investment to GDP ratio, investment to GDP ratio, Tax revenue to GDP ratio. Tax revenue to GDP ratio. The borrowings of this year to GDP. The total borrowings does mean not only this year. This year we're planning to borrow 15,96,000 so and so. Last year we might have borrowed. Iska pehle bhi we borrowed. The total debt. The borrowings of all the previous years would end up becoming the total debt of this nation, public debt. Why am I calling public debt? It's a collective debt. At the end of the day, we the people of India is going to repay it. So the public debt or the total government debt to GDP ratio. What do you think is the debt to GDP ratio of this country? Give me range at least. Don't simply say 0 to 100, 0 to 1000. What do you think is the total debt to GDP ratio of this country? When I say debt, I am just referring to the total debt of union and states. Huh? So, savings to GDP ratio, investment to GDP ratio, tax revenue to GDP ratio, borrowings of this year to GDP ratio, what is called fiscal deficit. Current account deficit to GDP ratio. Got it? In general, deficits are always expressed as percent of GDP. Not only in these budget deficits, even current account deficit. I think you understand current account deficit, right? Yes. Expressed, when I say current account deficit of this year is 1.2%, it does mean the deficit expressed as percent of GDP is 1.2. Clear now? Total public debt to GDP ratio. I am asking what is the total public debt to GDP ratio? Come on here. See, when I am discussing something, you're busy, okay, surfing internet. Isn't it? Looking at Insta Reels. At least so the right time to open your mobile phone is when you are not aware of a question asked. It's not when I am discussing something, just simply looking at what's the status of your girlfriend. Right? Savings to GDP ratio. Investment, because these things should be on your fingertips. The reason when you write an answer in mains, everyone knows what's the meaning of a saving to GDP ratio. Investment, what is the definition? But if you substantiate your answer with a fact, got it? So that would result in a relatively better score. You got it now? Yes. So these things should be on your fingertips. One, savings to GDP ratio, investment to GDP ratio, and the tax revenue to GDP ratio. Got it? Fourth, the current year borrowings to GDP ratio. That's fiscal deficit. Total public debt to GDP ratio. Current account deficit, okay, in terms of GDP. Come se come, these 5 should be on your fingertips. Okay? Yes. So now coming back to what we've been discussing, the first deficit I happen to explain is fiscal deficit. Is fiscal deficit. Having the total borrowings in the next coming financial year, the government is planning to make is given by fiscal deficit, and there are 2 ways of expressing in absolute terms. What's the money you are borrowing? Expressed as a percent of GDP. That's the other way. Right? Yes or no? Yes. In fact, if you say 15,96,000 crores, maybe most of Indians think, oh my God, itna sara paisa is what the government is borrowing. But expressed as 4.4% of GDP, then maybe psychologically people think, "Arey, theek hai, chalta, itna zyada paisa nahi hai." Of course, that's not the intention, but ideally you should just compare with your income. Am I clear now? So you understand what the fiscal deficit is? Should that be high or low? As of now, it's roughly around 4.4%. The fiscal deficit expected to be around 4.4%. Okay, what do you think should be the appropriate ratio? You think it's high? I mean, is the government borrowing high? Reasonable. What if the government borrows more? Remember, we have already discussed. More borrowings results in crowding out effect. More borrowings does mean more spending. More borrowing, more spending would also result in inflation. Do you accept it? Yes or no? Do you really think that more spending of government would result in more income generation of the public? More income results in more spending results in inflation. And that too, every year you just keep on borrowing more and more, your debt gets accumulated. The cost of servicing debt. Servicing debt does mean either paying principal or part of the debt or interest payments. That's what I call servicing debt. In fact, that's what's been happening in your state right now in Telangana. The current chief minister is being blamed. Sir, itna sara paisa aapne borrow kiya, 1.5 lakh crores. And all these years you've been lecturing that, isn't it? We have borrowed a lot of money. That's what the opposition party is saying. And now this man has replied saying that, yes, I borrowed 1,54,000 crore rupees as past. But he said, it's me 1.5 lakh, okay, isn't it? He just spent on principal or some part of the loan and interest. So ideally speaking, I just made use of 4,000 crores of total borrowings for the current financial year. So in a way he's saying, I was compelled to borrow. Am I right? Yes or no? In case if your papa has not borrowed so much money, I hope you understand, you could connect the dots. Isn't it? I would not be compelled to borrow itna sara paisa. Iska matlab hai, if the previous government has not made my state highly indebted, then it would not be a compulsion for me to borrow. Am I right? Yes or no? Because this year, out of the money I borrowed, how much money is what I spent for the current financial year or in the current financial? Only 4,000 crores. Imagine a state, let's say state of Telangana, which happens to have the debt of zero. In such case, ideally this man should have borrowed only 4,000 crores. Am I right? Yes. That being the reason, along with fiscal deficit, there is one more deficit you do come across in budget document, what is called primary deficit. In fact, this corresponds to the money that is being borrowed and spent for the current year. And how do you compute the fiscal deficit? Minus interest payments. Fiscal deficit, what is it? Corresponds to borrowings. Minus interest payment. How much you have spent on repaying interest. Let's say this year, how much you borrowed? 24 paise. How much is the money you are paying in the form of interest? 20 paise. In case if the state of India or the union government has not been indebted or there's no previous debts, definitely, saying that 20 paise that we are spending in the name of interest is something we are not liable to. Am I right? Yes or no? In such case, the amount of money government is planning to borrow would have reduced. So ideally, what's the money borrowed? Out of which, what's that particular proportion of money being spent for the current financial year could be better understood by looking at primary deficit. It's the total borrowings minus the interest payments. That's the primary deficit. Wait a minute. Should that be high or low? Low, right? Any deficit has to be low. That's something how you remember it. Isn't it? Yes or no? When could it be low? Either the money you borrow less or the interest payments. Does mean you're just simply borrowing money and that's been used to repay previous debts. Right? In case a state which doesn't have a huge debt doesn't need to borrow a lot of money. Am I right? It's as simple as that. You borrow 100 rupees and just spend 1 rupee out of it for interest payment does indicate your predecessors has a very good fiscal discipline. They're able to manage the finances very well, right? So they're able to manage the finances with whatever the means they had. But now you started borrowing recklessly. 99 rupees is what you are spending out of the borrowings you're making this year. Does mean it is you who doesn't have the ability to raise enough resources to meet the current expenses, and that results in debt liability. Someone else is going to pay the price in the future. Am I right? Isn't it? But rather, someone says, yes, I do borrow 100 rupees, but isme 99 rupees is for interest payments. Does mean he is conveying the fact, Hare bhai dekho, I was compelled to borrow. So actually out of 100 rupees borrowed, I am just simply making use of 1 rupee for the current financial year. You guys getting it? So what purpose the primary deficit happens to? Isn't it? And don't you think it is your responsibility to convey this same information to the public? Clear? That's the primary deficit. Fiscal deficit, primary deficit. What are the other two deficits that you come across in the budget sheet? Is a revenue deficit. And then Chaitanya, you have a doubt, so go ahead. Already excluding borrowing. No, fiscal deficit, what do you mean by excluding borrowings? Fiscal deficit corresponds to the borrowings. Come on, just now okay, मैंने बोला fiscal deficit, what does it correspond to? The money the government is planning to borrow this year. Because that's the reason. What is the fiscal deficit? How did we compute fiscal deficit? Subtracting the non-debt creating receipt. When I say non-debt creating receipt, includes both revenue receipt, capital receipt from your total expenditure. It's as simple as your total expenditure minus your total income.
But we have excluded already. Then interest, interest of borrowing, we are again
Okay, so now the question is simple. See, total expenditure. Total expenditure. It doesn't make, okay, so in this case, when it's a total expenditure, it could be for interest payments. It could be for, okay, I already happen to display where the money happens to. Some money in the form of grants, some money in the form of finance commission transfers, in the form of subsidies, central schemes, central sponsor schemes, interest payments. That's my total expenditure. And from it, I am subtracting income. I am not subtracting any interest payments. From my total expenditure, how much I am spending per annum and how much is my income per annum. That gives me how much money I need to borrow. Right? Isn't it? And out of the money borrowed, what part of it is being spent for interest payment? Got it? Isn't it? So that's the reason. Okay, you either stay with mobile phone or stay with me, isn't it? Then it would be easy. Okay? So how much money I am borrowing? Isme how much I am spending for servicing my previous debts. Isn't it? So that's what we are doing to understand primary deficit. You see, as I have given the example. One man borrows 100 and reports that he is spending 99 for interest payments. So he's just conveying the fact to the people, Hare bhai dekho, I am borrowing such a huge amount of money of 100 rupees. Not that I don't have enough resources to meet the current year expenses. My predecessor has borrowed too much money. And it's my liability. And it's my responsibility. इसी वजह से I am compelled. So इसका मतलब है out of 100 rupees borrowed, I just make use of only 1 rupee for the current year. So the future debt burden would reduce. Because I am just paying a good amount of your previous debts. But this other man says, I am borrowing 100, but it's only 1 rupee is I am liable to repay back. Or is required to pay interest. That means my predecessor has a very good fiscal discipline. They are able to manage the finances very well because whatever the expenses they require, they are able to manage with the revenues mobilized. But since I am not good enough to mobilize enough resources to meet my expenses, I am borrowing 100 bucks. And this 99 I am spending for this year would be a liability in the next generation. Am I clear? That's it. So you're not subtracting anything twice. Total borrowings kitna? Isme what part of it is you're using for a previous loan servicing? That gives the primary deficit. Clear? Yes. And then revenue deficit. How do you compute it? It's the revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt or revenue income. I mean recurring expenses minus recurring income. Recurring expenses minus recurring income. That's basically the revenue deficit. Okay. Generally, okay, let me ask a very generic question. Is borrowing a good idea or a bad idea? Good idea. Why? How do you generalize a very good idea? Okay, let's say your own state. Okay, let's say your own state. Because if you look at some 1 week back, the same gentleman, okay, in India today has said, my state doesn't have even 500 crore rupees for capital expenditure. And I guess yesterday in assembly, he was also saying the same thing because of financial crunch, severe crunch. I'm not able to pay the salaries on first of month to my employees. So that itself conveys the fact that Chief Minister openly accepting the fact that there's a severe financial crunch. Why is it so? Why is it so? Why is the state? Because as such, Telangana is sunrise state and rich state. Isn't it? Why is such a rich state, prosperous state is experiencing such severe financial crunch? Why? Okay, let's not discuss now. You know, because you are the beneficiaries of all the schemes. Right? Yes. Okay, I don't know hurt your feelings, but is it good to borrow? Is it good to borrow to implement such kind of schemes? Or is it good to borrow to invest in infrastructure? So that's it. So if I ask you a question, borrowing good idea or bad idea, you should ask me a question, sir, you tell me for what purpose, then we'll come with an answer. Saying it, so purpose matters. It's as simple as that. Do you think it's a good idea to celebrate your birthday party? Because once you cross a certain age, rather you should feel bad every time you happens to come across your birthday because you're getting old. In younger days, there's a reason to celebrate because you're getting more matured. But once you cross 30 and you start simply celebrating birthday party with, okay, that too with your hard earned money, theek hai chalta. That too borrowed money. Borrowing money to throw a party to your friends after 30, I don't really think it makes sense. It's sad, no? Borrowing money to watch your favorite star movie, isn't it, 4 times in the same day is a stupid idea. Am I right? But borrowing money to buy a book, not Chetan Bhagat's book. Got it? Okay, an Indian economy textbook is a good idea. Yes or no? That's it. It does matters. The purpose matters. You cannot outrightly say borrowing is a good idea. Purpose matters. And how much you borrow also matters. Like I said, fiscal deficit, there should be a limit. Because if the state borrows a lot of money, there would not be enough capital for the private sector. Interest rates increases. States borrows and spends a lot of money. Okay, inflation increases. Not only that, I guess you also might heard about this statement, fiscal deficit and current account deficits are generally referred as twin deficits. More spending, more borrowing, more spending results in more import bills. More import bill results in more outflow of foreign currency, less inflow for foreign currency. Fiscal deficit and current account deficits are also said to be called as twin deficits. You guys getting it? So, if you intend to spend it for a valid cause, reasonable cause, then even in such case, you should just keep your spending limit, borrowing limit in a certain limit. Am I right? Let's suppose you have been an higher education minister, Chaitanya, and you've been so over-ambitious and you end up, let's suppose you've been given the freedom and you borrow lakhs of crores of rupees to construct a Harvard-like university in every district headquarters. Ek hi saal mein. Not a good idea, right? It's no. Isn't it? So it's better to have a university that, okay, having a standards on par with Harvard University in every district. It does make sense. Indians really require, because itna sara population hai, what's wrong? Rather than simply having an engineer from a local college, that every engineer in India would have the same quality of education what IITs offer. Better, right? A better skill pool of labor, right? But does that make sense spending money एक साल में to construct so many schools, so many hospitals? Is it practically possible? No. Isn't it? And I've been saying the same thing. For you to borrow, there has to be some money with people to lend, right? It's not that you made up your money to spend and you plan to borrow. But thing is that you could only borrow when someone has some money and willing to lend. They should be willing to lend. You cannot say, I need money, Chaitanya, buy my bond, else I'm gonna. That's not how government borrows money. I think generally, how does government borrows money? How do you people borrow money? In case, I think you too young, you might not have gone for any loan, you might at least have noticed your parents. In general, how do your parents borrow money? Or how do people borrow money? We approach for a money lender. From an organized financial, okay, what do? So we place some asset as a collateral because you are a stranger to the bank. Right? Even though you are a good friend of banker, he wouldn't lend money looking at your face, right? He needs some collateral. The reason, in case you default, he should have an alternate source to get the loan recovered. So you place an asset as a collateral. You see, we call all such kind of loans as secured loans, because your loans are backed by a collateral, secured. But whereas there are certain loans that the banks offer, which are unsecured, not backed by any collateral. Not backed by any kind of collateral, like your personal loans, credit card loans. Am I right? Yes. But in general, most of the loans, if you notice, they happen to be secured. So what do? They place an asset as a collateral. Against the value of asset, you do get some credit. Am I right? In case you default, in case you repay the loan in the stipulated time, you could get your asset back. Am I right? It's as simple as that. I have an asset worth 10 crores. I am giving it to the bank at 8 crores and buying it bank, okay, same from the bank by paying 8 crores along with the interest rate. Am I right? You have gold worth 5 lakhs, selling it to the bank at 3 lakhs, buying the same gold back from the bank at 3 lakh plus interest rate. This is typically how we borrow money. Do you think the same thing is what the government is doing? Every time it borrows money, this year it's expected to borrow 15 lakh or let's say 16 lakh crores. Where do you think the government is borrowing all this money? Do you think it takes, okay, some documents, Red Fort ka, Taj Mahal ka, the newly constructed Parliament House, isn't it, and keeps it with a bank in Delhi? Huh? Ah, yes. So government doesn't need to do this because we all believe in the government. Am I right? The banker doesn't believe in you, but we all believe in government, right? Do you all believe in government of India? Do you all believe in government of India? Prove that. How do you prove? I'm not asking you to prove that you are a patriotic Indian citizen. Don't simply take your knife and simply say cut the hand and simply boon pe dekho. Isn't it sare jahan sach? No, I'm not asking you to prove that you are a patriotic Indian citizen. I'm asking you, how do you prove you believe in government of India? Paying taxes. Okay, so the one who is paying more taxes believe more in government of India? Okay, iske alawa, simple. Why do you make things complex? Huh? Law-abiding citizen. Come on, yeah, I know how abiding you are. Law-abiding citizens. Come on, yeah, you don't know how to sit in the class and you want me to believe that you are law-abiding citizens? Come on, okay, tell me, what else? Look at those papers the government prints, currency notes. Am I right? You might have seen, though it said the RBI governor simply says, I promise to pay the bearers also. But you also notice on that currency note, you could also find that guaranteed by central government. Until the government says a currency, we believe it. Yes or no? Does that currency note, the 500 note, right now with the high denomination, does it have any intrinsic value? Intrinsic value does mean the true value, isn't it? Let's suppose today Modi sir appears on TV and says, Arey, I'm just simply making an announcement. Yaad hai, November 8, 2016, 8 p.m. Do you remember it? It's almost 9 years back, isn't it? He came, surprise, November 8, 2016, he said, the high denomination notes no longer would be a legal tender. That's what he used. He never used a term called demonetization. In the entire speech, he never used a term called demonetization, right? It's a media coined this term. But he said the high denomination currency notes, 500,000, would no longer be a legal tender. What does it mean by legal tender? Legal tender. There is basically two terms, right? Legal and tender. Tendering matlab? Not the tender in tender coconut. Okay. Simply says if a currency is not a legal tender, does mean, okay, you no longer can use these notes in exchange for any good or service. I mean, the party, whoever is, okay, expected to accept it, has every reason to refuse these currency notes. So if a currency is a legal tender, iska matlab hai, that particular currency notes of any amount, of any denomination can be used to settle your debts. Settle your debts, I mean, use that currency to make any transaction. But agar the government itself says that it's not a legal tender, does mean the public in India has a right to refuse it. Has a right to refuse it. So he said, tomorrow if you take the same currency notes, India where people have a right to refuse, they might not accept it because I said so. And he said, okay, I'm going to come up with a 2000 rupee note. Am I right? Iska pehle there was no 2000 rupee note. The highest denomination until 8th November 2016 is 1000. But you know, there are times in India where there's a 5,000, 10,000 rupee note also in India, which have been demonetized by Morarji Desai sir. इसके बाद we only have a high denomination of 1,000. He said, no longer, I am going to come up with 2,000. Without asking any single question, we started. Am I right? In fact, everyone has been curious in India to have a first glimpse of 2,000 rupees. कैसे दिखता है? And you people are very happy because in pink color. Isn't it? Yes or no? Yes. Why is it everyone accepted it's 2,000? इसके पहले 2,000 नहीं है and everyone accepted because the government said so. So the government, unlike we people, doesn't need to mortgage any asset like Taj Mahal ka, Red Fort ka, isn't it? People believe. And the thing is that I'm just saying, of course, that's not how government redeems its debt. But you know, imagine a government has borrowed money. Government has borrowed money by selling some papers, and those papers are what we call bonds, government bonds, G6, gilted securities. There are n number of terms for it. And what's a bond? Is a borrowing instrument. Kabhi dekha, at least forget about a bond. I think in the modern days, you don't have any such kind of physical papers being traded. Everything is dematerialized. Either bond, shares, everything in India as of now more or less exists in electronic format. But good old days, people literally used to have, the government used to literally issue papers, contracts. Have you ever seen any bond paper? Generally, registered contract? Yes or no? Isn't it? In fact, forget about a government bond. Maybe, okay, you might have seen a rental contract. Simply rental contract. Right? So, is that contract made on a white piece of paper? Isn't it? What's the reason? Why should the contract has to be on a stamp paper? Why? What's wrong? Okay, what goes wrong if I happen to write the same agreement with my landlord in a white paper? Same party, right? My landlord, myself, white paper. Huh? Assurance by government. That's what I'm saying. Why do you need to go for all that lengthy process? Because it's basically an agreement. Why not on a white paper? So if it is registered contract, registered, isn't it? So there is someone who is just making a commitment. In case anyone happens to breach the contract, I would ensure the contract would be enforced. Am I right? Yes or no? इसके लिए there has to be a certain due process. You guys see, following what I mean to say? Same thing. In good old days, bonds more used to appear something very similar to it. The government used to say, I promise to pay the bearer so and so money. Okay, I'll explain when I discuss about monetary policy, don't worry. Bond simply is a borrowing instrument. So we buy it based on the trust the government is going to repay us money back along with the interest. Just self trust, that's it. Am I right? Got it? So government does raise money by selling bonds. Okay, so we're going to discuss that part when we discuss about monetary policy in the next session. But coming back, I hope you understand revenue expenses minus revenue income gives you revenue deficit. Is it good or bad to have a revenue deficit? That means, is it good or bad to borrow money to finance your recurring expenses because you're experiencing shortfall of recurring income compared to your recurring expenses? Is it a good idea to have a revenue deficit? I'm not asking, is it good or bad to borrow? I'm asking, is it good to borrow to finance your recurring expenses? Why? What's wrong with a revenue deficit? Yo. Okay. In recurring, it gets compounded. Okay. Okay. So what's the problem? If it gets compounded at the end of the bug, okay, people are going to pay it. Very good. See, here in this case, if you look at it, the way we are spending money, the borrowed money, generally we know the fact the recurring expenses hardly creates any asset. Right? But a capital expense results in generation of asset, and those assets has the ability to generate some income which might help you to repay back. But when it comes to this, it doesn't create any assets. Am I right? Let's suppose you are running this organization. isn't it? Or you're running a factory and you can't make enough money to sell your chocolates. That is good enough to run your factory, right? So iska matlab hai you need to borrow regularly to pay salaries and to pay the raw materials, isn't it? And if you're doing this continuously, it does mean you end up falling in a debt trap. Am I right? So you just keep borrowing, not to meet only current expenses, also to service the previous debts. Because you didn't have any source created to generate some revenue to help you finance your debts. Am I right? Yes or no? Service your debts. You don't have any source. You're just borrowing every month, throwing party to friends. Every month. That's your regular routine. Isn't it? At some point after you need to borrow money, not to throw party to friends, also to repay the previous debts. Am I right? Yes. Debt trap. That's the reason. It's not advisable. And what is advisable? Either have a revenue surplus budget or a revenue neutral budget. Matlab, where it's zero. Not good to have a revenue deficit. Am I clear now? So that's what the revenue deficit is. And the next deficit that you do come across in the budget sheet, which was being introduced, somewhere in 11-12, is effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit. And how do you measure this? This is the gap between revenue deficit minus grants in aid. Grants in aid or grants? In aid allocated for creation of capital assets. So who happens to offer the grants to whom? The union to states. So the revenue deficit, in this case, kiska revenue deficit I am referring? Union government ka. Minus the grants the union offers to the states, that is meant for creation of capital assets. See, the reason is simple. In general, if you notice, any spending or any allocations of center to states, either for implementing a scheme or grants in aid based on Finance Commission recommendations, we do report it as part of our revenue expenditure because it's a routine, regular expenditure, recurring expenditure. So that being the reason, we outrightly accepted the fundamental fact it's not good to have a revenue deficit. But the finance minister who happens to come with this idea, that's none other than Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. He says not entire revenue deficit is bad because the regular grants in aid I offer to states is now being accounted as part of my revenue expenditure. But some part of the money I allocate to states or I offer to states is resulting in creation of capital assets. Yes or no? Isn't it? So that's the reason you cannot outrightly end up concluding the fact the entire revenue deficit is bad because you have a perception that's mere expenses not creating any asset. But he says some part of it which is offered in the form of grant in aid to states, which is especially meant for creation of capital assets, is also ideally accounted as part of my revenue expenditure. And what should be the actual revenue deficit one has to worry is subtracting that grant in aid for creation of a capital asset from revenue deficit. Got it? So rather his logic is, rather than worrying about revenue deficit, we should worry about effective revenue deficit, isn't it? Got it? So that's the logic. It's simply revenue deficit, not revenue expenditure. Revenue deficit minus grants allocated for creation of a capital. Again, primary deficit is the fiscal deficit minus interest payments. These are four deficits. Look at any year ka budget, you just simply come across those four deficits. Okay? Yes. And this is the trend in deficits since 1670. Trend in a deficit. So the year before COVID, the deficits increased. Iska pehle you would notice, there's a reasonable discipline The amount of money government is borrowing every year prior to the year of COVID has remained more or less, okay, same, isn't it? Constant, but the year before COVID, it increased, and COVID it has gone to a very high level, and then the government borrowing slowly started coming down, and this year it expected to be 4.4, and the finance minister, the budget speech also made it clear the next year we're going to bring it to 4.1%. Because I say the more is the money I borrow, the lesser is the capital available for markets. Same data, no matter for what purpose I'm borrowing this money, but that do comes with a trade-off. Yes or no? When I say trade-off, I've been saying everything you do in life has a cost attached. Yes or no? There is always a trade-off we do happens to feel. Trade-off management, you want something, you would forego something. Yes or no? The time you spend with me, the time you cannot spend watching Netflix. Yes or no? The 100 rupees you spend on beer is the 100 rupees you cannot spend on biryani. Do you accept it? Isn't it? That's it. The money I borrow is the money not available for the private or markets. Yes or no? Isn't it? That's the logic. So there has to be a limit on the money I borrow. And that too, if I just keep on borrowing more, moreover, my expenses results in inflation too. So that's the reason the government happens to make a plan that we are going to cut down the borrowings, and it's 4.4% expected this year, and the next year her target is to bring it down to 4.1%. You understood now the trends and deficits? Yes. So this is about the fiscal deficit. Okay, so let's so now before answering this question, so if you've been asked a question, let's say, imagine you know what a deficit is. Simply the difference between your expenses and income. So now if you've been asked, how would you reduce the deficit? So if you've been asked a question, what could be done to reduce your deficit? That means the question literally translates to what could be done to reduce your borrowings, and what's the deficit gap between your expenditure and income, right, sir? Isn't it? So anything that helps to reduce expenditure and results in increase in income would help in reducing your borrowings. Do you accept it? Which obviously results in reducing your deficits. Am I right? That's simple logic. So with that logic, just answer this question. There has been a persistent deficit budget year after year. What action or actions of the following can be taken by government to reduce the deficit? Will this help? This? Why? Your expense increase. This? Kaise? What do you mean by rationalizing subsidies? This is more just and reasonable. Reduce wastage, diversion. Am I right? Yes. And then? What way? Import duty does not tax revenue. Revenue comes down. Income comes down. Deficit increases. Am I right? So hence for this cannot. Obviously got an answer. Okay? Very good. Sorry. Don't think too much. The question is, why would government borrow money? That's it. B. Bangalore. Delhi. I said don't think too much. Bus. That's it. See, many a times you just make mistakes, falling in trap. Because you've been sitting in the class having a perception, economics is very difficult, complex. Okay, so your thought process should also be very complex. Especially the problem with the current generation, Gen Z, you either don't think or think too much. But think like a normal person. The economics is all about simple common sense. Right? So in general, why would government borrow money? Just for it. Okay? Yes. So don't bring any exceptions and says my leader does this for this particular purpose, spends lavishly. Okay? But ideally they are supposed to borrow for development, right? Yes. So in fact, whatever you discuss is comprehended. So don't look at the numbers. Okay? If you look at it, this is how the revenue receipts would consist of tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Remember I said every budget sheet would have estimates of 3 years, right? So the budget estimates and the current year estimates and revised estimates. Where she is telling the people, okay, before the year, this is what I expected, but I am revising it. But it's not at final. Kyo? Pura saal is not done, right? Complete. CCO is actuals for the previous year, right? So that's how things work. And you'll be noticing, okay, look at the tax revenue. Just to one, okay, 2 years back is 23 lakh crore. In spite of providing a tax rebate on income tax, which results in loss in revenue of 1 lakh crore, but still the government is expecting 28 lakh crore. So those are may 5 lakh crore increase. That's the reason the government borrowing has come down compared to last year. Last year, what's the total borrowings? Look at it, 16 lakh crore revised. This year it's only 15 lakh crore. Got it? So the borrowings of this year is less than the borrowings of the previous year because there's been a phenomenal increase on the expected tax revenue. 2 साल का पहले is 23 and अभी तो 28 lakh. Even after 1 lakh rupees of 1 lakh crore rupees of loss in revenue due to tax rebate. Isn't it? Yes or no? Is that clear now? Yes. So I guess any doubt on okay? Just look at in the left hand side. I mean the extreme left column. You understand everything, right? Isn't it? So here in this case, if you notice total receipts kitna? 50 lakh crore. Total expenditure? 50 lakh crore. Do you accept? So total receipts should always be equal to total expenditure. And look at the borrowings and other liabilities. It would be exactly equal to the fiscal deficit. Right? And then out of the total expenditure, she is simply presenting what's part of this total expenditure revenue account. Is revenue account may what part of it is on interest payments and what is the grants in aid for creation of capital assets. Both happens to be part of my revenue expenses, which is part of my total expenses, and just simply presenting it separately. And then lastly, the capital expenditure. And what is effective capital expenditure? The capital expenditure of union government plus the grants in aid the union provides to states for creation of capital assets together is the effective capital expenditure. Am I clear now? So what I am myself directly spending, that's around 11 lakh 21,000 crores. And I'm also giving grants in aid for states to create capital assets. That is 42. 4 lakh 27,000 crores. Pura milake, it's 15 lakh 48,000 crores. Clear? But the most surprising thing you find it in India is, look at the interest payments is 12 lakh crores. But the money we are spending on capital assets is 11 lakh crores. Got it? So that's the PT. Okay? Yes. Now let's look at the deficits. Remember I said the fiscal deficit. Look at the number 15 lakh 68,000, which is exactly equal to borrowings and other liabilities, right? So fiscal deficit just gives you the planned borrowings for this year. And then primary deficit, effective revenue deficit, and then the revenue deficit. Any doubt? Okay. So, what do you think is the answer for this question? Okay, so with reference to Indian economy, consider the following statements. The first question, first option is a share of households. Okay, a share of the household financial savings goes towards government borrowings. Okay, what's wrong in it? Is it right or wrong? Okay, RBI is the one who happens to does the response. Okay, takes the response of selling government bonds. Because the internal debt management in India is taken care by RBI. And who could buy this bond the RBI sells in the market? Huh? Who could buy these bonds? Can you and me buy those bonds? Huh? From anyone. My question is, are we, the retail investors or common men, households, are we allowed to invest in government bonds? Yes or no? Then how? I mean, are we allowed to buy government bonds? Can we keep our savings in government bonds? Isn't it? So buying a government bonds means lending money to government of India. Yes or no? Can you buy bond? Where would you buy the bond from? कहाँ से? Through banks. Only through banks. Huh? See, I think you might be. In fact, you yourself could install this app. There is a scheme called RBI Retail Direct. Retail Direct. In fact, there is also a mobile app by name RBI Retail Direct. Does mean, in case if you're interested in keeping your savings in the form of government bonds, you don't need to walk into any bank or you don't need to walk into any financial broker, stock broker. You could just directly, log into the mobile app. There is a scheme called RBI Retail Direct. Even a retail investor does mean retail investor. Oh, I'm asking, who is it to be retail investor? Retail investor. Who is a retail investor? People like us who happens to invest a very small chunk of, and our investments, isn't in comparison to total size of market is very less. We are generally called retail investors because how much money you would invest? Institutional investor. Who is called an institutional investor? We are retail investors. People like you and me. Institutional investor. Okay, we just classify as DII and FII. DII stands for domestic institutional investor. FII stands for foreign institutional investor. So institutional investor has been any financial institution that mobilizes money from the market and invests the same in the market. Like a mutual fund company. You all know about mutual funds. What do? Where do they get the money to invest? It is from investors like you and me, right? Yes or no? Isn't it? Insurance company. What do you think LIC is going to do with all of your money that you pay in the form of premiums? And is LIC an financial institution? Yes or no? Isn't it? That's it. A financial institution mobilizes money from public, invests the same in the markets. We call it institutional investors. Am I clear? If it is an Indian company, we call it domestic institutional investor. If it is a foreign company, like a mutual fund company from US or a Bank of America, isn't it? Or AAC, an American Institutions Group, which raises money from the public and invests in Indian markets, a foreign institutional investor. That's it. So what's wrong with first statement? Why do you think the only second option is right? Don't you think a share of household savings goes into government securities? It's or no? Then why did you say it's wrong? And then second, dated security. Matlab kya hai? Generally, bonds do have a certain fixed maturity period. But that does mean that can there be a bond without any maturity period? Yes. And they are called perpetuities. Perpetuity. Perpetual, I hope you understand what's the meaning of the perpetual. So bonds without any fixed maturity period, we call it a perpetuity. I mean, you subscribe to that bond, does mean forever you get paid interest until you hold that bond. And you could freely trade it, but it would not have any maturity period. One good example, in fact, these were the bonds that been largely sold during First World War by the government of France and England. But even now, I think you might have heard about a bond called 81. Banking, you might have studied about 81 bonds. 81 stand for additional tier 1 bonds. 81 stand for additional tier 1 bonds. Tier 1 does mean not TYRE, TIER. Additional tier 1 bonds. These are the bonds that bank could sell to mobilize capital. To mobilize a capital. And see, maybe let me give you a hint so you could be able to remember. Okay, this is something you might have been taught during when it comes to Basel norms. Basel norms. Yeah, the Basel norm. I mean, at least you heard about something called Basel norms. Isn't it? As per these norms, the banks are bound to maintain certain adequate capital required to overcome certain types of risks. Isn't it? And O capital. Isn't it? To raise the capital, the banks are allowed to sell bonds. What we call AT1 bonds, additional tier 1 bonds. And ideally, these are the best examples of a perpetual bonds. Got it? But in general, 99% of bonds do have a certain maturity period. And that's what we call dated securities. Is that clear now? Understood? So is the answer, okay, second statement right or wrong? Huh? Because large part of government borrowings is financed through selling bonds. That's it. So what's the answer? That's it. Huh? Auction. Yes. I think you answered this. So now it's just look at. Okay, how are the auction? How is the price determined? I would explain when I discuss about monetary policy. Okay. So this is how the government debt is financed. So look at it. Out of the total borrowings government planned to make 15 lakh crore, mein 11 lakh crore is by simply selling. I mean approximately 11.5 lakh is by selling a G6. G6 stands for government security, also called as gilt-edged security or simply government bond. And then the major chunk comes from securities against small savings. I mean, remember I said public keep their savings with the, can also keep their savings with the government. Alright, not only if you have a surplus, you just gonna park it with a bank or post office, you could also save money with government. And that money the public keeps as savings with government, the government doesn't keep it in locker and keeps watching it, it could borrow from it. So that constitutes. And you would be noticing, let's look at the last one, external debt. It's 23,490 crores. So out of 15.5 lakh, hardly 23,490 crores, which is less than 1.5% of total borrowings, is what the government is planning to borrow from abroad. From abroad. Got it? So does mean around 98% of borrowings are internal borrowings. In the external borrowings hardly is 1.5%. You understand now? When I say borrowings, you could borrow money within India or you could borrow money outside India. Whatever the money you borrow outside India is your external borrowings. Whatever you borrow within India is internal borrowings. Am I clear now? And if you notice, is this year, not only this year, if you look at the trend, in general, the government always keeps its external debt as minimal as possible. So if I ask you a question, okay, so now with the same logic, can I so can I write the public debt? When I say public debt, the government debt could be classified into internal debt and external debt. So when I say public debt, I am referring to only government of India's debt. But if I ask you a question, is there a difference between the term external debt of India and external debt of government of India? External debt of government of India and external debt of India. दोनों में फर्क है क्या? Difference है क्या? External debt of India, external debt of government of India. Is there a difference between these two, or you think they mean one and the same? The question is there a difference or you mean they are same? External debt of India, पहले वाला. External debt of government of India. Do they correspond to the same, or do they mean the same, or is there a difference? Huh? Same. Debt of India, debt of government of India is one of the same. Difference. Okay, अगर difference है तो okay, what out of these two is more? I am writing it here so that you would not have any confusion. External debt of India and external debt of government of India. Do you really mean India and government of India what are the same? No, if you look at external debt of India includes the external debt of government of India. Let me write this as A. That's the external debt of government of India plus okay, the external commercial borrowings. External commercial borrowings does mean borrowings by the private sector. Commercial, why do we call commercial? Because profit motive, na? So, they borrow with an intention to make some money out of it. Private sector borrowings. Not only that, the other major component includes the NRI deposits in Indian banks. The NRI deposits is also our external liability. Is our external liability. Don't you really think so? In a bank, okay, in a bank, okay, you have deposits accepted and loans extended, advances. So what comprise assets of a bank and what comprise liability of a bank? Okay, so the question at least let me ask it from a simple terms. Asset का मतलब क्या है? What is an asset?
Very physical.
So I'm not asking whether it's tangible or intangible. In general, it could be a intellectual property, it could be a physical property, it could be a financial asset. But simply, my simple question is, what is an asset? Has a value, an utility, and also could generate some revenue. The potential, it has a potential. It's not necessary. It is generating now. Liability. So asset is anything that has a value, you own it. Liability is anything that has a value because things have value when it has an ability to generate some revenue, right? Sir, no. Yes. Liability is anything that has a value you owe to others, right? Isn't it? Are you assets or liabilities to your parents? Huh? Would you consider yourself as assets or liabilities to your parents? Asset. Paka? Paka? Yes. What do you mean by it depends? Why do you think it depends on individual? See, it's not that, okay, you're not earning money, doesn't mean, and you're dependent on your parents' money, doesn't mean you are a liability. If you just apply the same logic, tomorrow your papa retires and say, okay, comes to stay with you, would you consider your parents as liabilities? No. Just because you are dependent on your parents' income doesn't make you a liabilities. You are dependents, but you're not liabilities. Everyone in the class is, in fact, I do think that the most valuable assets your parents happens to. But just you end up killing your time for the next 2-3 years in the name of preparing civil services and do nothing except reviewing the movies that's being released in artistic crossroads, then you are called as a non-performing asset. You're still an asset. क्या करता है? Lunch in Bawachi, dinner in Cave Bahar. Isn't it? And the best thing you do is regularly review the movie because the crossroads is very popular for movie theaters, right? Then you are called. You're still an asset. Non-performing asset. Got it? Yes. So coming back to, even if you're a banker, simply bank ka simple job, accept deposits. And simply use the same money as, okay, extend it as an advance, a loan. So what do you consider as an asset and what do you consider as a liability if you are a banker? The loans, asset or a liability to a bank? Asset. Deposits? Liabilities. And with this you could also understand the meaning of what a non-performing asset. Many times you would come across this term called non-performing asset of banks, happens to rise, happens to fall. Especially one major success of the current government Because when they came to power in 2014, the NPS within Indian banking system is more than 10%, approximately 12%, and they have been successful in bringing to less than 5%. And you tell me, how would you define a term called non-performing asset of a bank? Don't use the example that I have given with respect to you. Non-performing asset of a bank. Yes, simply the accounts of defaulters rendered for not servicing their debts within a stipulated time period. Okay, we'll come to the formal discussion, formal definition when we discuss about banking. Now you understood, right? Yes. So when it comes to the external liability of India, it includes the liability of Government of India. It includes the external commercial borrowings, also any NRI deposits within Indian banks. I mean, that constitutes a major chunk of our external liabilities. I hope you understand. External liability and of debt of India, external liability of Government of India, they do happens to be different. Okay. But why? In fact, remember, 15.5 lakh crore is approximately what government is planning to borrow. Isme, the government is planning to borrow a very small chunk, sirf 1.5%. Why? Is that the government believes that no one outside India is going to buy my bond? No one outside India believes in me? Then why? That too, the more is the money you borrow from abroad, more is the money available for your investors in India. Am I right? Yes or no? Remember in the last class I pointed out, the private sector investment in India has literally been stagnated. The Indian economy is doing good, but most of it is literally because of government simply stimulating through spending a lot on infrastructure. It's very much required, but at the same time, unless the private sector investment catches up, we would not be able to sustain the growth. To become a $5 trillion economy or $30 trillion economy, the private sector investment has to catch up. But its problem kya hai? Like I pointed out, they say sluggish demand in the global economy. Yes or no? And the interest rates in India is very high. And the government itself is borrowing large chunk of money available. Increasing cost of capital. Then why not government be generous enough to borrow somewhere outside India so that the money within India is what left for the private sector? You understood the question, right? Why is government scared? Or what's the challenge in borrowing money from abroad? That's my question. Pardon? Leads to inflation. So government borrowing within India doesn't lead to inflation. Or what is more inflationary? Government borrowing in India, government borrowing from abroad. Okay. Weakens the rupee. Why? Because, let's say, why would you think it weakens the rupee? Because the government, out of 15 lakh crore, let's say the government simply says, I would borrow from abroad. Okay, so when I say borrow, let's say 15 lakh crore, let's suppose, imagine, isme 10 lakh crore is what I borrow from abroad. Whether within India or outside India, I should simply sell a paper, that's a bond. Isn't it? So when I plan to borrow money from abroad, I don't insist Americans, give me rupees. Isn't it? I would simply say, buy my bond. Buy my bond. And I could sell this bond denominated in two different currencies. One, I could simply sell my bond denominated in Indian currency or in foreign currency. Isn't it? Like I happen to sell a bond in India which is denominated in Indian currency, I could take the same paper to America and simply ask Trump, buy. Dekho, if you're interested, you could lend your salary to me. Isn't it? You could buy, subscribe to my bond. And I don't insist you to pay rupees. Give me dollars. And I would exchange it in my country. I would sell it in my country, make it rupees. Make it to rupees. But since I am selling a bond denominated in Indian currency, matlab kya hai? The interest payment regularly, whatever I promised to you, isn't it, would be paid in rupees. Because the bond itself is denominated in rupees. The interest payment, let's suppose 10% rate of interest I promised. You get paid in rupees. At the time of redemption, the face value of the bond would also be paid in terms of rupees. So that means the payment in this case would be in rupees for the next 10-15 years based on the maturity period. But I don't insist to pay in rupees. You could pay me dollars. I'm happy to accept it. But you get paid only in terms of rupee, the rupee denominated bond. Am I clear? Now tell me, friends, put yourself in the shoes of Donald Trump. And I happen to put forth this offer. Buy, would you like to buy this paper? Paper is denominated in rupees. Your interest get paid in rupees. The principal would be redeemed in rupees. That's option A. If you are the one who is an American investor looking for investing in government securities of India, would you prefer buying it? Let's say आपका market, I mean in your country, you're an American right now for some time. Okay, the interest rate is 5%, but buy bond promises 10% rate of interest. Got it? And let's say the bond has a face value of 10,000 rupees. Let's say, let me give you an extra information. The bond has a face value of 10,000 rupees. Does mean the interest is computed in face value, and the time of redemption you only get the face value. And I am promising an annual rate of interest of 10%, and it has a maturity period of, let's suppose, 10 years. And I am giving one more information. Let's say right now the dollar in the market is worth 80. Just assume this. Okay? Yes. So with this information, if you are an American investor, or let's say you are the Donald Trump, okay, you like India very much? Yes or no? Yes. So now I am just asking you, why don't you deposit or invest your salary in Indian government securities? Because आपका bank पे रखो, you get only paid 5%. Your $1,000, okay, let's suppose this is to make things much more simple, 80,000 rupee का bond है. अगर आपके पास $1,000 है तो park it in an American bank, you get paid 5%. 5% and $1,000 is $50. Am I right? You only get $50 per annum. But you would simply use that $1,000. Isn't it? And I'm going to give you 80,000 rupee paper. And you get paid 10%. That is 8,000 per annum. 8,080 per dollar gets $100. Am I right? Yes or no? So would you go for a $50 or would you go for $100? So tell me, if you are a Donald Trump, would you buy my paper? Would you buy my paper? Because this paper, if you buy, would guarantee 8,000 rupees. Pakka, guaranteed. A government of India ka promise. Right? And government doesn't have a reason to default. Am I right? Fifth largest economy, sir. Isn't it? That to payment in rupees. In case if I don't have rupees, but I still have a printing press. So there is no reason to default. Am I right? Yes. It's pakka, guaranteed. And 10 saal ke baad you get your 80,000 rupees. Would you buy it? So, if you have $1,000, would you park in a bank to receive $50? Or would you buy my paper to buy 8,000 rupees every year and 80,000 rupees at the end of 10 years? What would you exercise? This is option A and this is option B. Huh? Some log would go for B. Okay, take care. Yeah, that's what's mean, right? Everyone goes for B. Huh? Come on, yeah. Huh? Yes. Like I said, you either think too much, stop thinking. But applies a common sense. I have given you an extra information, $80. Okay, in fact, it's a clue. See, TK. Today, a dollar value equal to 80, isn't it? You got paid 8,000 rupees. And you just convert this 8,000 rupees, you get $100. Happy. Right? But imagine next year, it so happened, assume, isn't it? Now your 8,000 will only fetch you $50. Yes or no? Isn't it? Because what you get paid is guaranteed. But how many rupees you need to buy a dollar, I can't guarantee. Isn't it? What if beach may in the next 1 year dollar appreciates steeply or rupee depreciates to 160 per dollar? Does mean now you still get paid 8,000. But how many dollars you could buy for 8,000? Only $50. Isn't it almost equal to what your banks are paying? Yes or no? The next year it happened, okay, I don't mean it would happen, but okay, let's say now 240. Isn't it? Moreover, 10 years later, isn't it? It's literally, okay, 1600. I'm just, okay, exaggerating, my friends. I never mean to, okay, say it would happen. Isn't it? You get paid, okay, 80,000. But Isn't it? It hardly buys you $200. But the same $1,000 in a bank, every time you want, you could withdraw $1,000. Until it is the bank, you get 5%. Yes or no? Moreover, you're so unlucky that you subscribe to my bond which pays you 10%, but the very next year within your market interest rate also gone up to 10%. Got it? So now tell me, what option would you accept, A or B? Huh? A. Why? Secure. And what is the risk in this? Okay, now tell me what's the reason you happen to change your answer from B to A. Okay, you might have figured out there are certain risks in investing in this asset. What those risks you happen to figure out in just buying my bond? First risk है interest rate risk. Am I right? Interest rate risk. कैसे? Because my country में 5%, India में 10%. So 10% seems to be more. But it's not guaranteed because this 10% I get paid on bond is fixed. But the interest in my country might not remain 5%. It might increase. Am I right? Henceforth, to the buyer of a bond, there is a risk, interest rate risk. Am I right? Not only interest rate risk, the second risk that fellow happens to face is exchange rate risk. When I say exchange rate risk, in this case, the risk of rupee depreciation. See, if rupee appreciates, no deal, nothing to worry. But what's the probability of rupee appreciating? Am I right? So there is a tendency of rupee might depreciate in the long run against dollar. So there are two risks for the American investor. Interest rate risk, because whatever the interest the bond promises remains the same, but the interest in his market might change. Yes or no? So compared to what I get paid, this might become unattractive. The second is exchange rate risk. Today 80 could buy $1. But can you guarantee the next year it was the same price for $1? No. You guys getting it? Exchange rate risk. So that's the reason. Okay, he would take a step back when it comes to investing in an Indian government bond. But then how would you like to make it attractive? But still you just want to ensure that would be sold in Indian currency. Then to compensate these two risks, what should the government has to do? Has to promise him a very high rate of interest. Yes sir. If you offer नहीं मैं 10% नहीं है आपको मैं 50% interest दे दूँगा, then definitely you think अरे ठीक है this high interest rate by compensate these two risks. But what's the point of paying such a high interest rate to an American? Why don't you simply do the same thing within India, right? So that's the reason. Okay, it doesn't make sense borrowing money from abroad. In first scenario, if you sell a bond denominated in Indian currency, the risk is with the buyer of the bond. There are two risks: interest rate risk, exchange rate risk. Right? So either he asks, pay me high rate of interest to compensate the risk, or he insists, I don't want it in rupees, I want it to be denominated in dollars. So it would be very easy. So I would be able to overcome the exchange rate risk. Am I right? Yes or no? Isn't it? I would only bear the interest rate risk. Isn't it? So I would be able to overcome the exchange rate risk if you denominate bond in the dollars. Every payment I receive would be in dollars. Then he would be able to overcome the exchange rate risk. But that risk gets transferred from the buyer of the bond to the seller of the bond. Am I right? Yes or no? So now iska pehle, if the bond is denominated in Indian currency, the risk of depreciation is on the buyer. Now if it is denominated in dollars, foreign currency, the risk of rupee depreciation is on the seller. Both the cases, isn't it? It makes costly for the government to raise money from abroad. Am I right? And you tell me, for India to borrow money from abroad, what do you think is an ideal condition? If rupee is stable with respect to dollar, isn't it? It makes easy for governments to borrow from abroad. Again, if your rupee is volatile, people expect a very high rate of interest, or you denominate your bond in foreign currency, you might experience a very high cost in servicing those debts. Got it? So that's a very basic reason why people keep their exposure to foreign debt as minimal as possible. Understood? But you could definitely borrow more from abroad. The first and foremost thing that you need to ensure is your rupee should be stable. Imagine for a decade the value of rupee remains 80 per dollar. Then definitely If rupee has been stable for over decades, when I say stable, it doesn't mean that it should be constant. Imagine the value of rupee changes within a range of 79 to 81 in the last 10 years, then definitely people think, "Arey yaar, ye to asset TK, very worthy investing," because the value does move within 79 to 81. Stable, safe, secure investment. Am I right? Isn't it? So anything that's more volatile, that deters people investing in it. You accept it? Do you guys accept it? Same thing holds good. So that's the reason why would the government keeps its borrowing as minimal as possible when it comes to external borrowings. You understood? In fact, how many of you heard about this term called masala bond? Masala bond. Yes? What does it refer to? Bonds government sells to say, okay, buy masala. Then you heard about masala bond? Then what is okay, masala bond refers to? Just make a guess. This is a bond denominated in Indian currency that are traded outside Indian markets. Okay, generally this is how, okay, simply Indian currency denominated bond traded outside India. So because Indian cuisine is known for usage of spices, now people just use this stuff. Like the Chinese bonds, yuan denominated bonds, traded in Hong Kong markets are generally referred as dim sum. Dim sum. Similarly, the yen denominated bonds, Japanese, outside Japanese markets, they are referred as sushi bonds. It doesn't mean that the Japanese are selling money or bonds to raise money to buy sushi. It just tries, okay, it refers iska bond, but that's it. So in general, okay, in fact, I think in 2017 or 18, there's a question. IFC. Kabhi suna IFC? You heard about World Bank Group? The World Bank Group. See, as such, there is no organization, especially in the name of World Bank Group. Okay, so in the name of World Bank Group, we generally refer these 5 institutions as, okay, as World Bank Group. IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction Development. IDA, International Development Agency. These two together in general referred as World Bank. Then we have IFC, International Finance Corporation, a private lending arm of World Bank. I mean, it lends money also to private sector. That is called IFC. And this IFC in the year of 2016, for the first time happened to issue rupee denominated bonds outside India. Masala bonds. That being the reason in 17 or 18, that's the question. And then the other institutions happens to be MEGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and ICSID, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. Pura panch milake, we refer as World Bank Group. First 2 are referred as World Bank. And the reason why, okay, masala bond is in news those days, IFC for the first time in 16 happened to sell a rupee denominated bond. And IFC is a private lending arm of World Bank. Does mean it lends money to private sector. Clear? Masala bond ka matlab yahi hai. So what I'm just saying, agar if the government of India intend to borrow money from abroad, there are 2 options. You could denominate in Indian currency. You could denominate in a foreign currency. But dono mein काफी ज़्यादा risk है. And it would be easy when you could ensure rupee is strong and stable. Am I right? Yes or no? If it's highly volatile, isn't it? Someone in the market has to bear the risk, right? So that's the reason we keep our borrowings as minimal as possible. Okay? Yes. So answer this question. And answer this question and I will clarify. So let me make it clear. So when it comes to the debt, internal or external debt, okay, so do add something to your note. internal debt management. I mean, any money the government borrows within India, the internal debt management in India, as of now, is taken care by RB. RB is the one who does the job of internal debt management. But external debt management is taken care by Minister of Finance. So, simply think RBI acting as a banker to the governments does help the government raise money from markets. So, whether it's say internal external debt, the debt of the government could be also classified based on duration into short-term debt and long-term debt. And in general, the long-term debt is financed by government by simply selling G6 bonds, government securities, gilted securities. That's a common practice. And these bonds could have a maturity period. When I say long-term, does mean it's having a maturity period of more than a year, 365 days. That's a long-term. Okay, and people don't need money only for long-term. Kabhi they might also need money for a short-term. Like just now, yesterday, your chief minister was saying, by first of month, I am not able to pay salaries. I am not able to pay salaries because severe liquidity crunch. So, iska matlab there is a short-term need for a liquidity for your chief minister. Am I right? Yes or no? In the bank account of the state of Telangana, which is with the कौन सा बैंक में स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ऑफ तेलंगाना हैज इट्स अकाउंट यस सो वो अकाउंट में पैसा नहीं है फर्स्ट ऑफ मंथ आई एम नॉट हैविंग इनफ लिक्विडिटी इवन मिनिमम बैलेंस हैज बीन exhausted and I am not able to pay the salaries to the people, pensions and salaries in the first of this month. So इसका मतलब है governments might also require, isn't it, or experience shortage of liquidity in short term or in long term, right? Yes. When it comes to short term, okay, generally the practice is the governments raise money by selling T-bills, and in this case T-bills stand for treasury bills. Treasury bills. Okay, so in general the maturity period as of now, so prior to 1997 government of India and okay, yaad rakho, the T-bills could only be sold by union government. States are not supposed to sell T-bills. 97 का पहले we used to have a 14-day ad hoc treasury bill, what's referred as ad hoc. I mean ad hoc, that's temporary. Now okay, we discarded this practice, no longer. In general, as of now, the treasury bills have a maturity period of 91 days, 182 days, 364 days. And it's not like a constitutional mandate. If the government wants, it could come with a paper with a different maturity period. But in general, the T-bills have a maturity period of 91, 182, 364 days. Matlab hai, you buy this paper, you could redeem it within this stipulated period. That's it. Understood? That's a common practice. And in the year of 2010, the government of India has introduced one more short-term borrowing instrument with a maturity period of less than 91 days. And that is what is called cash management bills. Cash management bills. So when it comes to long term, the union government happens to sell the government securities, state government happens to sell bonds and now state development loans. Okay, let's not bother much about states, but okay, let's concentrate on keep it. So this is the practice. Long term ke liye you just sell bonds, dated securities. Short term ke liye you have T-bills. Less than 91 days, you could just simply 2010 say we have come up with a cash management bill. Simply a paper I sell with a promise to redeem it after a certain period of time. That's it. Am I clear now? This is the practice. But along at the same time, when it comes to states, even states might require money for short term. Isn't it? So the other option, okay, to meet or finance the short term borrowing requirement is through ways and means advances. Ways and means advances, which is of again two types: normal ways and means advances, special means advances. I think you would be able to recollect. Ways and means advance, a temporary credit support, credit facility, a short-term credit facility the bank provides to its bankers. The bank provides to, not bankers, I mean to say, to its okay, governments. A temporary credit facility. Like RBI provides short-term credit to banks through repo window, MSF, Siva is the case. RBI acts as a banker to the governments too. In case if the banks happens to experience shortfall of liquidity, then RBI do happens to come with a short-term credit support in the name of ways and means advances, which is again two types, normal and special means. It's simply like a short-term loan for a period of 90 days at the prevailing repo rate. If you delay the repayment, payment beyond 90 days, it is considered as an overdraft. And it attracts repo rate plus 2% interest rate. It's as simple as your credit card loan. Most of you might have a credit card. At least you heard about a credit card. Is the credit limit on all of your cards one and the same? No, right? And what determines your credit limit? Your income. Same thing. Same thing. You could apply same logic. The RBI do says, once in every 6 months, let's make a deal. You let me know how much money you might require to meet your short-term liquidity crunch, and I would arrange it. Because 97 ke pehle, commonly RBI used to buy the debt by printing currency. But that's a very stupid idea of financing debt, printing currency. Am I right? Yes or no? So we happen to stop this practice and replace with the concept of ways and means advances. So what RBI says, once every 6 months, let's meet and you let me know how much money you might need to meet your short-term mismatch, and I would arrange it. Like a credit cards. Again, if you have a credit card limit of 4 lakhs, do you think you could just keep on using regularly every month? No. Right? If you repay the previous loan, the credit limit again extends to 4 lakhs. Same thing. I will provide you short-term credit support. In case you exhaust all of your money in my bank, isn't it? Badly need 90 days के लिए आपको short term credit support मैं दूँगा. But what's the limit? The limit is not uniform to all states. That primarily depends on your GSDP income. But imagine his state want to borrow more than what I happens to permit him. Then I'm willing to lend an extra penny than what is been priorly accepted. But that extra money that you intend to borrow is what I refer as overdraft. Overdraft. And it costs you repo rate plus 200 basis points. 200 basis points. Yeah, the basis point does mean 1% of 1%. A basis point simply does mean, okay, it's written as BPS. 1 basis point is equal to 1% of 1%. 1% does mean 1 out of, okay, percent, 1 out of 100. Divide the same 1 unit into 100 parts again. Right? So that means 1 by 10,000 part is a basis point. So generally people use basis points to express interest rates to magnify the impact. To magnify the impact. So rather than saying 2%, you could say 200 basis points. 50 basis points matlab 0.5%. 75 basis points matlab 0.75%. That's it. So 1% of 1% is a basis point. So if you want borrow beyond what is being accepted, priorly committed, then I will refer it say overdraft. And that costs you 2% more than the prevailing repo rate. In case you delay your payment beyond 90 days, then it again attracts an interest rate of repo rate plus 200 basis points or repo rate plus 2%. Either 2%, 200 basis points, one and the same. Do you accept it? Yes. That's how the internal debt management takes place. Am I clear? So these are the instruments, and that's how the states and center. But just keep that in mind. T-bills cannot be issued by state governments. Okay? In case they are badly need, you have this facility, ways and means advance. Your banker is going to offer you short-term credit for a 90 days. Got it? And how much money each banker, okay, each state is going to get depends on the respective size of a state economy. You guys getting it? Like your credit card limit is not uniform. Depends on your income. Yes or no? Same thing holds true. You delay your credit card payment, what happens? 36% interest rate. Same is the case. You delay your repayment of loan beyond 90 days, it costs you repo rate plus 200 basis points in the name of overdraft. Clear up? So that's how the internal debt, okay, and the external debt is managed. Is that clear? Any doubt? Okay. So, answer this question. What's most inflationary? The question is not simply what causes inflation, is what is most inflationary. Huh? Delhi? Very good. Why? Because if you look at it, imagine there are two ways of financing deficit. I could borrow money by selling a bond. When I borrow money by selling a bond, does mean the liquidity in the economy or the money within the economy is what I'm borrowing, someone spending it back. And my spending would result in generation of more income, which results in inflation. But in the last case, if you look at it, with the money that's already in the system, I'm adding an extra penny without any corresponding increase in output. So the medium of exchange in the economy is increasing. But the goods and services that can be traded remains the same. Money becomes worthless. Am I right? It's as simple as that. I just contest the election with a promise. You make me prime minister, I'm going to distribute printing machine. What printing machine? Money printing machine. You could print in your own denominations with your photos. Why Mahatma Gandhi? Isn't it bored about looking at the same picture? You could just print currency with your own girlfriend card. So that everyone would become rich, crorepati. Right? Good idea. That's how I plan to eradicate poverty. Casey, by distributing money printing machines. Or I would ask my RBI governor, because at least in good old days, the RBI has to use paper. But now they have the concept of CBDC, central bank digital currency. So money no longer need to be printed and brought in circulation. They could create an electronic currency, right? Simply, create. Just a click on computer, you could create currency. And I would ask my RBI governor, you make me prime minister, I have a proposal to make you rich. What do? I would ask my RBI governor to print currency or to issue currency and deposit 1 crore into every person's bank account. Everyone is a crorepati. And that's my idea to eradicate poverty. Got it? What's wrong in it? Huh?
Simply coming with 10,000 rupees.
Simple. The thing is that now everyone has 1 crore. Does it really solve the problem of poverty? No. Now the problem is there would be now bhikshapatis who are crorepatis. Because everyone has too much money. Too much money chases too few goods. Prices increase. That coffee now costing you 50 bucks would cost 50,000 bucks. Right? Goods and services remain the same. But everyone has too much of money. Isn't it? That's it. Prices tends to increase. And your affordability or your consumption capacity greatly reduces. Purchasing power of money rapidly erodes. That's it. Isn't it? That's the problem. Same logic holds good, right? What is more inflationary? Creation of new money. What's the answer? B or D? So, देखो first, most of India's sectional debt is government debt. एक क्लू दिया आपको मैंने. Look at this side. This year debt itself, government is 1.5% of total debt is what we would like to borrow. By the same logic, government always prefers keeping its borrowing as minimal as possible. The private sector could take the risk because it's for commercial motive. Isn't it? So that's most of India's external debt is not of government entities. It's hardly not more than 20%. And all of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. Let's say every Friday evening, the RBI happens to make the information public about the forex results. $640 billion है. मतलब पूरा का पूरा RBI reserves is only in dollars? No, for comfort, we express it. Isn't it? Right? If I ask Deepika, okay, Deepika, beta, how much is the wealth you own? If she keeps on listing, sir, I have Vishakhapatnam to, isn't it, 10 acres of land. In Karimnagar, I have 2 properties. In Bangalore, so and so. In Delhi, so and so. 2 kilos of gold, 3 kilos of ornament. Then she keeps on saying, I would say, beta, you might have time, but mera paas nahi hai. Sirf express in terms of rupee. Just simply. So she could say, sir, mera paas 200 crore assets hai. Asan, simple. Am I right? That's it. Just for the comfort we express it. Doesn't mean that the forex is only in terms of dollars. It could be in dollars, it could be pounds, isn't it? It could be euro, it could be in gold, it could be in SDRs, special drawing rights with RBI. Right? That's it. So that is expressed in dollars. Let's say $3.9 trillion is the Indian GDP. Same thing could also be expressed as 280 lakh crores. That's it. Just for comfort we express it. Doesn't mean that it's denominated only in US dollars. Right? Answer kya hai? Okay. Very good. Chalo, make it fast. I think you might have been taught about FRBM. I didn't explain about FRBM, right? So the logic is basically, in fact, FRBM review committee of NK Singh. Because you know the idea of FRBM, I think you could recollect it, right? Is to impose a limit on borrowings so that it would result in some fiscal discipline. Else, if you don't have any such restriction, you end up going recklessly and end up simply throwing in the form of freeways so that you would remain in power forever. So the FRBM committee headed by NK Singh has suggested the government has to concentrate on reducing its borrowings, total public debt, and it said by 22 it should not cross, okay, it should be kept at 60% limit, 40% comprising central debt, 20% comprising state debt. That's what is being suggested by NK Singh, FRBM review committee. But the actual FRBM Act is of 2003, notified in 2004. But the NK Singh panel committee has also suggested the fiscal deficit should be in the range of 2.5 plus or minus 0.5%. So that 0.5% is what he called as an exceptional or escape clause. Only at times when you're really in badly need, then you could just go for extra 0.5%, but preferably it should be limited to 2.5%. Got it? Yes, that's the, I think you could recollect it, right? Yes, so that's it. Okay. So, in fact, these are some extra information related to budget, okay, some schemes, and this PPT is what, okay, I'll share, and this may, nothing really requires an explanation because it's basically facts and the schemes, okay. If you have any doubt before the end of classes, isn't it, do let me know, I would be happy to explain. But none of them requires because everything is a fact and this is only from the budget sheet of this year, okay, the budget speech. Got it? So this completes the fiscal policy, and break ke baad we're going to discuss about inflation and monetary policy. Got it? So it's 11:30, sorry, 10:30, sharp 10:45. We're going to reach you.